Hello everybody, Jediwarlock here and welcome back to another video here on the channel. Today we are returning to the world of Azeroth to take a look at one of Warcraft's most famous big game hunters, Hemet Nesingwary. After conquering the wildlife of Stranglethorn Vale and Nagrand, the Wrath of the Lich King expansion brings Nesingwary to the lush Sholazar Basin, an ecological paradise created by the Titan Keepers that hosts a wide variety of exotic birds and beasts. Nesingwary and his crew have ventured here to hunt big game, and you as the player have the opportunity to help them out while questing in this zone. However, I believe there is much more to this premise than what is discussed in-game, and without proper intervention, Nesingwary's expedition here could amount to his greatest ecological crime of them all, and become one of the greatest landscape disasters in the game. So, with all that being said, let's get right into it and explore the world of Warcraft. When players first enter Sholazar Basin, one of the first places they encounter is Nesingwary's base camp, a ramshackle collection of tents and canopies serving as an outpost for Hemet and friends as they begin their hunting in the region. Perhaps the most striking feature near the camp is the boat wreckage strewn about along the riverbank. This is, in fact, the vessel used by the expedition to reach Northrend, and it ended up here due to a rather poor choice of navigation, with the boat smashing through the, presumably, partial seawall at the precipice of the basin and falling down into it. In-game, this river is known as the Seabreach flow, and it is here where our investigation into the environmental impact of Hemet's expedition begins. My first main piece of evidence to some sort of impending ecological disaster hinges on the idea that the Seabreach flow, or what it once was, changed dramatically with the Nesingwary shipwreck. Sholazar Basin has 5 main rivers: the Seabreach flow, the Bittertide River, the Icecrown River, the Lifeblood River, and the Wintergrasp River, all leading down into River's Heart in the middle basin of the zone. 4 of these rivers have well-defined paths or reservoirs along their length, but the Seabreach flow seems different. You can even see on the in-game map that this inflow is the most disjointed of the 5. Not only does the path of the river have a pretty substantial gradient in parts, which is indicative that this new flow has not fully established itself yet, the nearby wild growth mangle appears partially flooded, with no defined path for the water to flow through on this stretch of land. The more you explore this part of the zone, the more it becomes obvious that something has recently changed, and the river system is showing signs of acclimation to this new increase in river flow. But before we get into why this increase could be so catastrophic, let's first examine another interesting discovery of mine, that something like this has happened before, right here in Sholazar Basin, but the damage was fixed before it became too late. In the north of Sholazar Basin, the Bittertide River flows south into River's Heart, the only other inflow stream in this zone that draws directly from the frozen sea. I was curious as to why this river was broken up by Bittertide Lake, and what I found underwater was shocking. Lo and behold, it was another shipwreck, obviously older than the Nesingwary boat, but undoubtedly had arrived here in the same way. Also, there are some interesting Titan artifacts here underwater that could imply this area was once on the surface, and the fact that this road around the zone is also broken by this mysterious lake all but confirms this theory. So, we pretty much know this first shipwreck incident resulted in the formation of Bittertide Lake some time ago. But why all the fuss? Sure, some more water flowed in, but everything seems fine on the Bittertide side of the basin. Well, there's one more piece of evidence here that suggests the issue was at one point a lot more threatening. In both Bittertide Lake and River's Heart, two species of aquatic life can be found here: Bittertide hydras and stranded threshers, which seem to indicate these creatures once belonged to the frozen sea before being washed into the basin and became trapped. A flooding event followed by a rapid drainage event, the latter of which I believe was facilitated by the Titan Keepers themselves in an effort to return the ecosystem to normal. While this first shipwreck seemed to have some lasting consequences on the ecosystem of Sholazar, it appears as though the powerful Titan Keepers, or at least Freya, the Keeper of Life, was able to reverse the massive inflow of seawater and limit the damage to the creation of Bittertide Lake. However, in the case of the Nesingwary boat incident, I don't think the situation will be quite so forgiving. While you are questing in Sholazar Basin, you interact with an avatar of Freya, who tasks you with helping deal with the Scourge threat here. With the recent fall of the protective Lifeblood Pillar, a massive avalanche has occurred, and undead soldiers of the Lich King stream forth. While I don't think this avalanche itself will have too many lasting consequences in Sholazar, the Scourge are taking the Avatar's attention away from dealing with the inbound threat of flooding. Even after the undead are dealt with by the Avatar and the player, it is unclear whether or not the Avatar itself would be able to reverse the flooding. In the unfortunate case the full power of the Keepers is needed to repair the landscape, there would be little hope for the basin, since assistance would have to wait all the way until the end of the Siege of Ulduar, when the Keepers are freed from Yogg-Saron's control. Let's finish today by discussing what the impact of the Nesingwary expedition really would be here in Sholazar Basin. When we're discussing water, an important concept to note is that of water storage. The change in storage of a particular area, or in this case basin, is equal to the sources of input minus the sources of output. In Sholazar, we know the 5 rivers are the major inputs into the river's heart, perhaps with some pattern of precipitation as well. Outputs are slightly more interesting, as there are no outflow rivers into the neighboring zones. Therefore, the only realistic source of outflow here is evaporation. However, observant explorers may also note there appear to be some hydrothermal geysers at the center of the zone, which could mean this rate of evaporation is significantly higher than normal due to the water being superheated. This little detail deserves its own section or video, honestly. Sholazar volcano theory, anyone? But for today, it's just a contributing source to our little equation. Assuming this equation was pretty much balanced before the arrival of Nesingwary, meaning the water level of the basin wasn't really changing at all, this certainly would not be the case after the shipwreck. With more water flowing into the zone and a relatively unchanging rate of evaporation, this must mean the water storage is increasing. What could this look like? Well, it's hard to say for certain, especially with the possibility of Titan Keeper intervention, but in the worst case scenario, I'm thinking something like this. A completely flooded Sholazar facing absolute ecological collapse. Sure, the stranded threshers would be fine, and probably wouldn't be so stranded anymore, but all the other species here would be in big trouble. Nesingwary better figure out a way to fix his boat soon, or else the effects of this literal dam being broken will soon come back to haunt him and the rest of the zone. If we ever return to Northrend someday, it's probably a good thing you've all had some practice exploring Vashir and Nazjatar, because the Sholazar Basin of today could very well be the Sholazar Bay of tomorrow. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing my little theory on one of Northrend's most iconic zones. I had a lot of fun researching it. As always, make sure to like the video, comment down below with your thoughts, subscribe if you're new to join the Jedi Order, and until next time, peace.